Deep Sea Embers Chapter 151 to 160. Chapter 151, The Fear of the Demons. Duncan bent down to check. It was indeed the nun, the one who had been talking to Duncan and Shirley not long ago and was currently theoretically praying in the main hall. But now she had collapsed here, dead near the entrance to the underground church. Even until the last moment when Duncan pushed the door open, she was, in fact, physically leaning against the door. From what he could tell, the nun was trying to block something from invading the underground church and had endured fierce fighting before falling. It's like she just died. Shirley had dared to come over and poked her head out from behind Duncan's figure. Yes, it looks like it's not been long since she died, and even. Duncan said, reaching out and putting his hand on the nun's arm, even the temperature is warm. The body at the entrance to the underground sanctuary was still warm, and the blood stains on the scarred body had not dried up yet, which gave even Duncan the feeling that the battle was still going on when he and Shirley had just stepped into the church. Perhaps, the nun was still breathing during their exploration. But that's impossible. The church had been abandoned for 11 years. Whatever vision caused its destruction must have occurred back then as well. There's no way the nun could have been alive for all these years. Duncan took on a grim face as he slowly stood up and looked around. The underground chapel of this community church was just a spacious basement as he thought. There were no lights here, and even the oil and gas lamps that were supposed to ward off evil spirits were extinguished. If not for the faint light coming down from the stairs, it would be complete darkness here. Nevertheless, he could still make out the faint outlines of the goddess statue at the end with various scriptures hanging from the wall. Duncan stepped over the nun's body, looking for traces of battle in the basement. He saw the dents on the walls and columns, the potholes made by bullets, and the traces of being burned by flames. They should all be left over from the battle. Adds by PubFuture. But he did not find the enemy, the invader, that the nun had fought desperately before she died in battle. He then turned his head and looked at the dark hound, who was following behind Shirley and cautiously watching the room as well. Dog, what can you see? Traces of time and space being severely distorted. It doesn't seem to have the overlapping reality effect, like on the surface levels. However, the truth is, time and space are far more distorted here than anywhere else in the church. Dog's tone was particularly grim when speaking. As the only supernatural expert in the three-person squad, his analysis was obviously much more organized than Duncan's blind guess. The entire underground sanctuary in my eyes is shrouded in a layer of mist, and the wrong time and space have completely replaced reality. But I didn't find anything other than the phenomenon of space-time distortion. What about the intruders who attacked here? Duncan frowned. That nun can't be here to fight the air, right? There are no intruders, Dog sniffled, though it had no respiratory system, no scent of the living, nor the scent of the dead or demons. Speaking of this, he paused and added, please believe my judgment in this regard. The best thing that we hounds are best at is hunting. Distinguishing the scent of prey in the environment is the basic ability of a predator, unless. Duncan raised his eyebrows, unless. Dog quickly looked around as if suddenly becoming very cautious and alarmed, unless something from subspace came out from here. I can't track such a thing, but if it's something from subspace, you should be more familiar with this subject than me. When Duncan heard this, his face immediately stalled due to how out of the blue this was. Sorry, I'm really unfamiliar with this. Dog quickly lowered his head. If you say unfamiliar, then it's unfamiliar. Duncan thought for a bit and understood the dark hound didn't believe his denial. Unfortunately, he had no excuse otherwise because he really didn't know a thing about subspace. He recalled the rift he saw when he observed the statue in the church's main hall, the chaotic light and shadow leaking out of the rift, and the strange visions he saw at the bottom of the ship. Subspace? Is it really something from subspace that came out? If it's really something that ran out of subspace. Duncan frowned as if talking to himself. How did they manage to break directly into the main prayer hall of a storm church? Shouldn't a place like this be the safest? Judging by the traces and clues, the intruders did not attack from the outside but appeared directly inside the building. That's beyond me. Dog shook his head. The secret of the four major churches is a knowledge-blind zone for us shadow demons. We don't know much about subspace, and it's you humans who are crazy enough to study that taboo. Adds by PubFuture. Humans have always been a very bold race, Duncan casually added and looked at the hound, but I'm a little surprised now. The deep sea is closely adjacent to subspace. How could you demons be more afraid of subspace than us humans? Isn't that place supposed to be the same thing as your home's front door? It's the same logic as those who live near a volcano. You wouldn't expect them to drink magma, right? Dog curled his tail behind his butt after making that remark, afraid the offensive language would anger the great ghost captain. We live near the edge of subspace, so we know better than any mortal not to dabble with that place. Duncan mused over this detail, figuring out a new question that just came to him. Is that the reason why your kind is so afraid of the vanished that managed to return from subspace? Dog shrunk his neck and nervously glanced up at Duncan. Normally he wouldn't answer such a question, but since it's coming from the owner of the vanished itself, he decides to be honest on the matter. Actually, if the vanished had just returned from subspace once, then it wouldn't be so terrifying. The key is that the ship kept dropping back and forth between reality and subspace. It's like witnessing something oscillating between the two dimensions. Duncan didn't expect much initially, but after hearing this new and important piece, his heart jerked to attention, oscillating between the real world and subspace. Yes, every time the ship would directly penetrate the spirit world and the deep sea, dragging everything it encounters along the way like a rampaging cannonball. Dog obviously felt uncomfortable speaking of this and curled up on the floor. I still remember the terrible scene when the ship dropped down from the upper levels like a meteorite. The flames that wrapped around the ship were screaming with twisted souls of you humans. Even us demons were caught up in the carnage and had to flee everywhere. This happened many times. It smashed through all of the dimensions until it fell into subspace. Then it would pop back out several days later. Imagine seeing this occur on a rinse and repeat cycle, going up and down, up and down. Even us demons were traumatized afterward. Dog gulped with great difficulty after spelling out his woes. Oddly enough, it felt good for the dark hound like he just went to therapy. I want to emphasize something. Prior to that event, we demons didn't know what fear was. Our instincts were always about fighting, but afterward, our kind learned what fear meant as an emotion. And I am one of the parts from the Nether Lord that had the deepest ingrain of fear due to that event. Duncan almost became lost for words after hearing the story. That. I see. I now understand why you have such a big psychological shadow hanging over your head. Don't you know this? Duncan almost broke his facade and blurted out, how the 4x am I supposed to know what the original captain did? Why am I always the scapegoat for all the blame? But no matter how big the complaint was, he could only stuff it in his heart. I probably didn't pay attention at the time. Dog. Seeing the devastated appearance of this dark hound, Duncan sighed and added, I'll pay attention next time. His tone was very sincere, which left Dog to the point of being touched and unable to move. On the other hand, Duncan himself was briefly stuck in deep thought. If what Dog said is true, that's to say the vanished had at one point completely fell out of control. It kept returning and going from subspace. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 152 Inches Undecided. Duncan did not expect his casual question to reveal so much about the vanished from a hound's mouth. Although he had heard this description before, but who would have thought that this infamy was smashed into existence using such crude and simple methods? A ghost ship that constantly oscillated between subspace and reality was like a cannonball shuttling between the roof and foundation. Every vibration damaged the spirit world and deep sea, leaving a trail of carnage by dragging everything along with it into subspace. As a cherry on top, the incident occurred over a long period as well. It's no wonder a shadow demon like Dog would have its fear ingrained into his bones. Who wouldn't be traumatized if they had to witness something that crazy? But compared to the shocking mess that the vanished once made, Duncan was more concerned about the ship itself and the real Captain Duncan. Was that shock intentionally done by the real ghost captain? Or some kind of uncontrolled trek caused by madness? Did the goathead know what was going on back then? If all this was intentional, then what purpose fueled this crazy venture? The vanished. Will it get out of control again? For a long time, the vanished has been Duncan's biggest backbone, his safest hiding harbor. The safety of that vessel was equal to his own safety. It's the reason he explored the ghost ship and took control. It's to ensure his own safety in this weird and dangerous world. But now he learns the greatest threat was in fact that very ship. Will I be able to pull a ghost ship back from subspace if it plows straight into it? After the idea of being unable to control the vessel started to sprout, the man was shaken to the core. He's not delusional enough to believe a story merely based on hearsay, but there's that door down at the lowest cabin on the Vanished. And the way the goat head reacted after learning there was an open crack. There's no question about it. The subspace had never stopped calling out to the Vanished. It's always been trying to convert it back into madness, like Dog said. Taking a small breath to forcibly calm his irritated mood, the man clenched his fist and felt powerless. No matter how much he thought about it, he didn't have the ability to meddle with issues related to subspace at the moment. He knew far too little and lacked manpower. Perhaps the 4 main churches could help, but that's for another date. Ads by PubFuture. Let's focus on what's here first. Duncan shook his head to dismiss the trap he made himself. If something from subspace really invaded this underground church, then things from 11 years ago are far more complicated than everyone had assumed. He raised his head and looked at the door that's no longer there. The nun here barricaded herself here before dying in battle, probably to prevent the thing from running outside. But can a simple door prevent an invader from subspace from leaving? The invasion of subspace is also situational, Dog said thoughtfully. In most cases, the real world is protected by the gods. Alright, I admit I don't like them very much, but they've effectively protected the mortals from many dangerous beings. Like a shadow of subspace, they must first locate a medium before influencing the real world. It could be a polluted item, a fleshly body, or even the human heart. As Dog went on, he suddenly halted and glanced up at Duncan nervously. What invading shadow of subspace? In my view, you are the greatest threat of all here, damn it. Go on, and then what? Duncan, the walking subspace invasion, cluelessly pressed the dark hound without knowing what he represented. I mean, subspace invasions can normally be blocked off by the sacred facilities in the churches. And since the invasion is not from the main body, one only needs to cut off the connection to stop it. Of course. Dog gulped when reaching this part. The price needed to do this is another matter entirely on its own. I see, so that's what happened, Duncan nodded nonchalantly. When he faced the nun who had fallen to the ground, his eyes now showed admiration. She must have done everything she could to prevent that disaster from further exploding. But she probably didn't succeed, right? Shirley's voice suddenly came from the side. Due to the discussed subjects being too high-end or too scary, the girl hadn't found a chance to interject herself until now. 11 years ago, the fire still happened. The fire 11 years ago was caused by the sun fragment, yet we found traces of a suspected subspace shadow in this church. It is not clear how these two things are related. Duncan shook his head, then he seemed to have thought of something and slowly came to the goddess statue at the center of the underground sanctuary. But, I am suddenly quite curious about something. He raised his head and peered at the slightly different stone face to the one on the main floor. What are you curious about? Shirley followed, glancing cautiously at the weird statue as well. Ads by PubFuture. This storm goddess, what was she doing during all this? Duncan raised his hand and pointed at the statue. The church was invaded, the priest died in battle, and only a phantom soul remnant was left outside. Why did the gods here not react at all? At the very least, she should have warned her believers of the dangers and threats here. Why not send help? I don't know much about the gods, but this matter is indeed a little suspicious, Dog grumbled when he heard this. Although the connection between the gods and the earthly world is not close, they are indeed always concerned about their respective sanctuaries. These buildings where the followers gather are like the anchors of the gods in the earthly world. Now that one of the anchors has been silently unplugged for 11 years. It's weird that nothing has been done. Duncan mused again before raising his right hand. Rubbing his finger, he summoned a small flame from the tip to illuminate the statue. What are you going to do? Dog started to shiver and rattle his chain while cowering backward. If one can't make a decision, just make a little fire. Duncan forms a mischievous grin, maybe the burn will drag out something that's hiding here. Dog was shocked by what he heard. Wanting to remind the boss that it's the church of a god, the dark hound stopped at the last second after recalling the situation. He had no right to stop a shadow of subspace. Besides, the church had already fallen. What's there to protest about? Nevertheless, that doesn't mean Dog wouldn't take protective measures. He had quietly distanced himself from Duncan and dragged Shirley along. If there's really divine punishment coming down from overheard, he and Shirley wouldn't be able to bear it. Duncan noticed Dog's movement, but he didn't care. Of course, he didn't want to attract the attention of the storm goddess either, but in the church's main hall just now, he had already confirmed that this sanctuary had already eroded to the point of no return. So if something was watching the church, it could only be some evil force. The ghost fire silently burned as it fell to the ground like a droplet of water. It's hazy and illusory, quickly rippling along the sanctuary floor to instantly fill the entire room. However, just as quickly as it spread, the flames silently extinguished itself once it hit the end. Shirley and Dog exchanged a weird look with each other, and after a long while of this eeriness, Shirley finally broke the silence. What did you find? With some surprise, Duncan looked at the little flame that was still jumping on his fingers. Is there really nothing here? Or to say, the power of the flames is not enough to pry apart the curtain that shrouds here? He frowned, and at this moment, a very slight, almost hallucinatory murmur suddenly entered his ears. Who's there? Duncan was startled and suddenly looked up in the direction of where the voice came from. N-O-B, in .c ohm. It's the statue of Gomona, standing quietly in the darkness as usual. Chapter 153 Inches Time and Space Lock. Within the darkness, the statue of the storm goddess Gomona continues to stand quietly at the center of the underground church, covered with tulle and overlooking the earthly world. Of course, according to strict doctrinal distinctions, the goddess in the underground sanctuary was the other side of Gomona. It should be called the Maiden of Tranquility. Duncan stared at the cold stone sculpture, certain he had not misheard the voice. It sounded like a whisper from a dream, illusory yet real. However, Shirley and Dog, who were close at hand, had not responded at all. Apparently, only he had heard the voice somehow. Mr. Duncan. Shirley had picked up on the man's strange behavior, causing her body to shiver and cling to the hound. Did you find something? Say, did you hear anything just now? Duncan casually extinguished the flame at his fingertips and asked. He drew closer to the statue to look for oddities. Hear something? Shirley and Dog exchanged looks, then both shook their head in unison. No. The goddess did not respond to Duncan's approach and left him worried he might have been a little reckless this time. He assumed the goddess's connection had been severed from this church due to nothing happening when they summoned Dog. It's the main reason he loosened up and went wild. To think he would actually attract Gomona's attention was something he didn't expect. I need to keep a better guard next time. This is too reckless. And while he reflected on the blunder inside, the ghost captain had other questions that popped up. Looking at the situation of this church, this place was obviously abandoned and forgotten. At least before Shirley and I came in, Gomona's connection was also blocked since she didn't react to my flame. So what's going on? Instead of completely erasing the goddess's connection with the church, my flames instead strengthened the connection after it burned. The more Duncan thought about it, the more confused he became. Nevertheless, he didn't dwell on the issue for long. Ads by PubFuture. In the end, he couldn't be sure whether the vague whisper just now was genuinely Gomona's voice or not. It's just speculation on his part, and the priority remains to be on what to do with the church here. After so many findings, Duncan has gotten enough information to conclude this to be an important node for the veil shrouding over the sixth block. He would love to pry apart the curtain, but neither he nor Shirley had the power to do so. Well, he technically could, but the power transfer was limited due to the distance from the vanished. After weighing his options, Duncan got a faint idea of what to do. It's time to be the enthusiastic Mr. Duncan again. This church has been hidden to this day, and some inexplicable force blocked prying eyes from looking inside, but what if he forcibly lifted the lid off? He's curious about how the storm church would react and even more curious about what the storm goddess would do. Since he couldn't open the curtain here, why not blow it up in the news and let someone else do it? Of course, it may not be enough to merely find a few patrolling night guardians to make the report. The shadow here may simply kill off the first batch of investigators who come in. Now, what's the most reliable and effective method to slap this onto the news? That's something worth deliberating. After thinking over his options, Duncan unconsciously formed a grin. This was the smile of a happy person planning something fun. Unfortunately for Shirley and Dog, this smile didn't escape their eyes, especially the latter, who had clamped his tail behind the butt. Mr. Duncan, do you have something in mind? Dog stutters this out. It's nothing much. I'm only planning to make a contribution to the order of the city. Duncan waves his hand like it's nothing special. Dog gurgled like he just ate a lemon, thinking not a single demon in the deep sea would believe this saying. Just now, the big boss was obviously planning sinister. He's sure of it based on that creepy grin. Okay, there's nothing else to see here now. Duncan didn't care about the reactions of Shirley and Dog and turned around to give one final glance at Gomona's face. After leaving a meaningful look, he ushered the two to begin going. This place is not suitable for staying any longer. The group quickly moved, but just before leaving the underground room, Shirley couldn't help but stop and ask, Mr. Duncan, what about this dead nun? Duncan also stopped and quietly eyed the lady that died in battle. She was still very young, so young that it's a pity to have such an ill-gotten fate befall her. Ads by PubFuture. But then Duncan suddenly realized a problem. Nun. Why is it a nun who guards the church? Under normal circumstances, shouldn't there be a team of specially trained guardians stationed here? He recalled what he had seen in the main hall. The group of guardians seemed to have died in the main hall of the church. They weren't killed in battle, at least not in a struggle. Instead, they just suddenly died while praying on the bench. Then none here. Instead of overseeing the prayers, she's down here alone and fighting a battle on her own with a huge sword. None of this made sense. I'm sorry, I can't put you to rest. You will have to stay here for a little longer. Maybe someone will come to investigate and figure out the truth later. Duncan said softly to the nun's body. In his view, a professional's hand was necessary in this matter. With his mind made up, Duncan didn't give any more room to stall. Placing his hand on the girl, he began to push Shirley out with the girl protesting, are we really going to leave her here? It's called preserving the crime scene. Duncan didn't look back. Let's go, the investigation here is not over yet, but we don't need to do it ourselves either. Shirley merely nodded and followed the ghost captain's direction. The party of three quickly made their way up the stairs, but just before they exited, a slight creaking sound suddenly came from behind them. Duncan abruptly stopped and returned his head to the source. It's a dark wooden door with reinforced steel and rivets. Sacred rune patterns were also faintly etched on the door handle. N-O-B, in .c ohm. Shirley also glanced back after they stopped, which caused her eyes to widen in horror. The door. Shirley raised her finger and pointed at the door, her mouth ajar at not knowing what to say. I can see it. Duncan interrupted the girl, then walked back to the dark wooden door that should have burned away due to his ghost fire. He tried gently pushing like in the first round. It's locked, and there's clearly something holding the door on the other side too. Duncan didn't know exactly what's happening, but after a few seconds of contemplation, he resisted the urge to light another fire. They already got the general idea of what happened inside, and the strangeness here made him give up any desire to keep trying. The warp space here is really strong. At the same time, in the main storm cathedral of the upper city, Vanna had just finished her daily routine of praying to the goddess with her subordinates. Following this would be to do some paperwork inside the church's archive. In a sense, the library not only contained the administrative works of the church but also the history of planned. Chapter 154 Inches Archives. The church's archive was managed by an elderly priest in his later years. Due to the nature of his profession, the senior had somewhat of a hunchback due to past injuries and a constant smell of oil and gears. Right now, the old priest was sitting behind a dull circular table and concentrating on a mechanical creation in his hand. It was an item that looked like a Rubik's Cube, and with the help of some ingenious tools, he disassembled it into a pile of parts for further examination. N-O-B, in .c ohm. When Vanna approached, her tall body had blocked the lamp light next to the old priest, causing the latter to look up at the person coming over. Oh, it's your excellency. What help can I offer from these old bones today? I like to know where the records for the various disasters and accidents of 1889 is. Vanna nods to the old senior as her way of saying hello. Disaster records from 1889. The old priest hummed as he knocked on the wide circular table. In the next instant, a slight mechanical friction sound came from beneath, followed by the retreat of the table board to reveal a machine with many round digital dials and paddles. Accompanied by the creaking sound of the machine running, the old priest began to operate this delicate machine with the help of those paddles and digital dials. After inputting the necessary information, Vanna heard the low characteristic noise of larger machines running beneath her feet. Through the vibrating floorboard, where countless gears and rods were happily running with steam, she then heard the expected crisp ding from the mechanical device from the front. With this sound, a printed tape was then spat out of an opening next to the operator. From this path, turn left in the third aisle of bookshelves, then take a right at the end. One of the lit aisles is the one you seek. The records aren't organized though, so it's a mess. Everything from big events to small steam accidents was recorded there. Ring the bell if you need more help, the old priest said as he handed over the note with his prosthetic hand. It's a brass construct with delicate working parts that reached up to the shoulder. Vanna of course didn't miss the guardian's missing hand that had been hidden away from view until now due to the long sleeves. Such veterans weren't uncommon in the civilian department of the Storm Church. Those who fought at the front line against the shadows of this world are all like this. More often than not, they have to sacrifice their flesh and blood in battle. When they could no longer serve the church as a combatant, the best home for these old servants was the backlines in the civilian departments. In this case, the old priest had clearly lost a limb and now uses a steam-powered magical prosthetic on his job. In a certain sense, this would of course be considered preferential treatment for old soldiers who could use a relatively relaxed and high-paying job. However, in another sense, it's also an excellent use of allocating talents. Their bodies may be unfit for battle, but their wills are strong, and the work of guarding books and archives always required a strong will. A trace of respect appeared in Vanna's heart as she took the paper with both hands. Thank you. Ads by PubFuture. Remember to pack up the books after reading them, and don't touch those books that are not on the list. The old priest waved his hand. There are many books here that haven't been touched in a long time. Best not to them. After that, he returned to his work, and subtly ignored Vanna. The female inquisitor didn't care and just took the paper tape with the long list of books printed on it. She walked towards the depths of the archives, where she quickly found herself confronting a series of bookshelves that were tall enough to be described as majestic on both sides. For a moment, Vanna even imagined herself running through an initiation gauntlet of guardians here, the shelves being the guardians and her being the new recruit. Before long, the lady had found the bookshelves mentioned by the old priest. A row of small light bulbs lit the shelves to indicate the files that she could flip through. The files were not low either, but fortunately, Vanna was a very tall woman herself, so she didn't need a ladder. This brought great relief because running around with a ladder in such a huge library was no easy feat. She took a light breath, found the beginning of the file on the shelf, pulled out the numbered book, and quickly flipped through it. What she's looking for was simple. The fire from 11 years ago, or the fire packaged as a factory leak. In fact, this was not the first time she had investigated this matter. As an inquisitor, she was already sensitive to all unusual phenomena, including what happened to herself. After finding out that only she remembers the fire in her childhood, she has privately investigated some more on her own, but those superficial investigations have not yielded anything. Before long, she had quickly put the matter behind her and thought nothing more. Because no matter what, she was only 12 years old when she encountered the accident. She was neither a believer in the goddess nor a person of outstanding brains. It was not impossible to have some false memories in the mind of a child who panicked and inhaled poisonous smoke. Therefore, it didn't take long for her to put the matter down after consulting some public files. But now, she suddenly discovered that there were still people in the city-state of Pland who had experienced the fire like herself. The doubts and countless speculations that had been put in the back of her mind instantly surged up, and her professional vigilance as an inquisitor was frantically blaring in her mind. Ads by PubFuture. It was precisely because of this professional vigilance that she rejected Haida's suggestion to return to the antique shop and quietly waited until today. Here, she could investigate the original documents that are sheltered by the goddess and not made public. The reason was simple: there's a dangerous atmosphere in this matter. Erasing a fire sounds easy, but in fact, it involves the cognition and memory of thousands of people at an enormous scale. What's more, there are cultists involved as well back then with the sabotages that year. If all this was really done by a hand hidden behind the shadows, then this hand would never sit idly by and watch someone detect the truth. The memories that remain in her own mind, the memories that remain in the mind of the girl named Nina. These residues are most likely the omissions of the masterminds behind the scenes. The person hidden behind the scenes may not have discovered these omissions yet, but if he did, she herself wasn't afraid, but Nina and her uncle, and the girl named Shirley, they're only ordinary people. So, she rejected Haida's suggestion at the time and asked her friend not to mention the matter again. On the one hand, she did not want to startle the snake while investigating in secret. On the other hand, she wanted to avoid involving the innocent. Until I have more information, I mustn't show any more attention to that antique shop than necessary. Slowly flipping through the file in her hand, Vanna's mood kept fluctuating. For some reason, there's this inkling sensation that something was spying on her while she's here, a ubiquitous eye of unknown origin. Naturally, this left her irritated and uncomfortable since this was the goddess's realm. No shadow could invade this place, at least according to her own perception. Under this atmosphere, she placed the file down and picked up another one next to her while going over the recent happenings in the city. Currently, many active scientists in the city have been captured. It seems that the resolute action of the city-state has effectively deterred those heretics, or it may be that the channels they infiltrated have really been completely destroyed. In any case, the numbers have been significantly reduced, and the prisons under the cathedrals are filled to the brim. Better yet, the purpose of those Sun heretics operating in the city-states has long been ascertained. Look for the Sun fragment that appeared briefly 11 years ago and may still be hiding somewhere. Sun fragment. The fire of 11 years ago. The vision that Heidi had glimpsed into at the museum before. Vanna stopped flipping through the pages, and some clues that hadn't caught her attention suddenly joined together, becoming more and more prominent as she began to examine the fire in her memory again. There is a connection behind these events. The fire of 11 years ago is definitely real. The young inquisitor lightly gasped, and at the same time, her gaze inadvertently swept over some words on the file. Quote. On X day of X month, block XX, a vicious heretical worship incident occurred. 3 residents built an altar in their home, sacrificed blood, and prayed to some evil thing that's not on record. This caused panic and nightmares among a large number of nearby residents. The sacrifice ceremony was eventually reported and destroyed, but the clues left at the scene could not point to any known evil god or spirit. In theory, the sacrificial ritual should not have been effective since blind worship doesn't yield effects. Nevertheless, the ritual worked and caused panic and nightmares among the local population. Follow-up investigations confirmed that the area had indeed been affected by supernatural forces at that time. Chapter 155 Inches Suspicion. Vanna's gaze lingered on the record for several seconds more as her keen nose picked up on the whiff of a plot. Heretical sacrifices suddenly appeared among ordinary citizens, the target of the offerings pointed to an unknown existence, and the ritual eventually attracted the attention of supernatural forces despite not meeting the criteria. Yet, despite all these abnormalities, no follow-up investigations were taken. It's then a flash of clarity hit the woman. Putting down the file in hand, she hurriedly opened another record she had just read before. It was also in 1889, but a little earlier than the factory leak. An armed attack had taken place in the lower city, which was handled by the police force during the day. Such case files wouldn't usually be kept in the church's archives since they only dealt with the supernatural, but here we are. According to the record, the victim was a customer who suffered a mental breakdown inside the shop. The suspect insisted he saw the shadow of blasphemy on the window and fought back with a knife. This caused the officials to search the shop. There, they found sacrificial symbols etched along the basement walls. However, no one could figure out who the offerings were meant for. Then through interrogation, it was later learned that the shop owner carried out sacrifices in private due to some unknown guidance. This was also a random sacrificial ritual, which was theoretically impossible to take effect since it had no proper worship target. Despite this crucial factor, small-scale insanity did occur in the neighborhood afterward. Vanna frowned at the similarity between the two events. From the surface, it may appear to have little to do with the factory leak 11 years ago, and they did not correspond at all in terms of timing. However, her instincts are telling her otherwise. As a leading inquisitor of the Storm Church, her instincts are an extension of her holy powers. If it's blaring an alarm, then she must trust it. After finding nothing more, she returned the 2 files and continued rummaging through the subsequent documents on the shelf. This time, she deliberately paid closer attention and actively searched for records related to heresy worship. After an unknown amount of time, she suddenly stopped. There's a 3rd record. It occurred at the edge of the upper city limits and before the factory leak as well. According to what's written in the report, a maid working for a wealthy man's home suddenly went berserk and attacked the household, injuring 3 other servants and the master of the house. Afterward, the maid locked herself in the warehouse when the church guardian and police arrived. Unfortunately, by the time the authorities broke down the door and barged in, the maid had already committed suicide with a dagger used to carve heretical symbols along the warehouse walls. They later found evidence in the deceased's room to back the claim that she was a heretic. However, the investigators found something amiss though and left an important note in the document: the offering was pointed at an unknown existence that's not on record. Ads by PubFuture. That's already the 3rd one. If Vanna was only slightly concerned when she found the first 2 cases, then now, she's completely sure she's onto something serious. She quickly arranged the information in her mind, analyzing them according to when and where they occurred. The events were scattered, independent in time, and unrelated in location. Therefore, there should be no theoretical relation between the parties or the factory leak from 11 years ago. Vanna continued to rummage through the follow-up files, and it didn't take long for her to find the documents about the factory leak. It was a major event with a wide-ranging impact, and the number of heretics captured in the follow-up sweep was almost the highest in the past 20 or 30 years. Therefore, a separate book file was used to record the whole thing. The thick document was quite heavy, and it included a large number of pictures and interrogation reports from back then. Such a large volume would take ages to get through, but Vanna had no trouble skimming through everything. She had read this many times in the past in other places. It seems that even in the church's archives, there is no more information about the factory leak than what's made public. Vanna placed the document back and rummaged through the other stacks of papers until she noticed something peculiar at the end. Aside from the 3 cases that occurred before the big event in the middle of the year, nothing else happened afterward. It's like the strange events were all just building up to the grand finale. Then poof, it all mysteriously disappeared. Of course, this could also be explained by assuming the authorities had captured most of the cultists in the huge sweep afterward. But for some reason, she got this inkling sensation that it couldn't be that simple behind these seemingly unrelated events. With the seed of doubt planted in her heart, Vanna knew she couldn't let this go until the truth came out. Stopping, she quickly returned to the front to start anew. But just as Vanna was about to pick out the first documents again for a second read, an unhurried sound of footsteps caught her ears. She could pick up the faint scent of gear oil and incense in the air. Ads by PubFuture. Stopping to look up, the lady noticed it was none other than the old priest charged with overseeing the archives. The man was limping over. Apparently, his leg had also been changed to a prosthetic one. "There are no people around this time, so came to take a look," the old priest said with a smile. "Have you found the information you wanted?" Vanna gave a soft sigh and placed the file in her hand back on the shelf. "I found some information, but I didn't find the answer I wanted." Answer. The old priest now sounded curious. "What kind of answer do you want?" Quote. "How long have you been here?" Instead of answering directly, Vanna suddenly asked a seemingly irrelevant question. "Ah, it's been a long time. Let me think. It's been almost 20 years, the old priest chuckled. "I've been in this place since I was blown up by a homemade bomb by those heretical maniacs." Vanna mulled over the pain that must have caused before asking more. "Is it always this deserted here on weekdays? Will anyone else come like I did?" November LBJNN. Most of the weekdays, yes, it's like this. However, some do come on occasion, but not many, the old priest replied frankly. The files here are the memories of the past, and the archive is the deepest part of that memory. Once sealed, they are no longer suitable for public disclosure. Besides, new things are happening every day in the city. Nobody is going to have the free time to flip through old documents and sealed files. The old priest suddenly paused when he said this, then raised his head to peer up at the dome overhead like he was reminiscing the past. And sometimes, the archived files are not just records of the past, but the actual history sealed within those pages. The past, the present, and the future of our world, it's all built on a precarious foundation. It's not good to meddle with such a frail thing. Quote. The way you speak, you sound like one of those flame bearers. Yeah, the flame bearers always did preach in this fashion. They guard our history and constantly worry about ancient beings spilling over to contaminate our modern world. You know, some even suspect the Enders are the byproduct of a flame bearer being polluted by subspace. They're always so sensitive. The old priest smiled and shook his head at the silly thought. When I was young, I had a close relationship with several friends from the flame bearer church. It's how I ended up speaking like them. Although their teachings are different from the storm church, everyone is still a follower of the light. It's not bad to learn from them when possible. For some reason, Vanna's heart felt a little calmer while listening to the old man's story. Are you still in touch with those friends? No, not anymore. The old man shook his head slowly like he was lamenting a fact. One morning, I suddenly found myself unable to remember their names. I suspect they were probably martyred on the job. Chapter 156 Inches The Year That Disappeared. The old man's tone was flat in the same manner as someone telling a story. The fact that he's also a character in it was a mere coincidence. Sorry, it's easy to talk too much when you're old, the old priest apologized with a smile at Vanna. Do you have friends from the other churches too? I have a good friend who is a member of the Truth Academy. Vanna thought for a moment, but she doesn't tell me much about the teachings of Lahem, the God of Wisdom. Oh, a believer in the God of Wisdom, this is normal. Their creeds usually require a university degree or higher to understand. Sometimes they even need to pass an advanced mathematics test as well. The old priest nodded his head as a matter of course. In contrast, it is the followers of death who are easier to deal with. After all, everyone has to die eventually one day. Speaking of this, the old archivist paused and eyed the neatly arranged files behind Vanna. Your Excellency, mind telling me what you are looking for? Vanna suddenly grew hesitant. She didn't know whether telling the old priest the details was a good idea or not. The erased fire could potentially be a point of great danger to all of them. Alarming the secret entity wouldn't help anyone, especially those who learn the truth without being prepared. But after a brief hesitation, she decided to reveal something. This was the deepest part of the church, the sanctuary of the storm goddess. This priest may be old and unfit for battle, but she has no doubt that his determination as a warrior of the light remains true. I'm looking for a file. Actually, calling it a file is inaccurate because I don't know if it exists in the first place. Vanna began to slowly explain her reasoning. Strictly speaking, it's a clue that happened in June of 1889, probably pointing to a great fire, but the information has been erased. A great fire of 1889. The old priest pondered. I don't remember any fires. He stopped abruptly and gave Vanna a thoughtful look. So, the erased material also includes our memories, right? Likely yes, Vanna nodded solemnly. Aside from my own awareness, I don't have anything else to prove the fire's existence, nor do I know who's manipulating things behind the background. This is all based on my own suspicion. She suddenly felt a little embarrassed. As an inquisitor, she was used to questioning and investigating cases, but the situation was completely different this time. Not only did she not know who or what's the target, but she also didn't even have enough to confirm whether it was a ghost or the living. Furthermore, she launched this entire investigation based solely on her own whim, which was very different from her usual rational style. However, the other party in front only nodded calmly in acknowledgement. Your faith and character are evident in itself, Your Excellency. After saying that, the old priest quickly limped over to a column between the nearby bookshelves. Then, tapping several specific bulges on the pillar with his mechanical prosthetic hand, a low rumble of pistons and cogs came from beneath the floor. The doors to the archive promptly swung closed while many shelves started to interchange in various ways to make space for the pillars of runes from below. During this mechanical transformation, the subtle sound of the waves echoed softly in Vanna's mind, a sign that the barrier had been activated. There is no need to be so alarmed, Vanna was a little confused by the old priest's actions. I'm only conducting a preliminary investigation. Past experience tells me that there is no preliminary investigation of a great threat, the old priest said as he limped towards Vanna. Then raising his mechanical brass hand to point at the records, and I believe what we are facing is worthy of my security measures. Something that can interfere with the cognition of an entire city isn't just some small variable. But your hasty blockade of the archive may cause concern to many. No, it won't. The archives are randomly rearranged several times a month. This is to keep the sacred blessings from being corrupted. The old priest guffawed like a hearty old man with those jagged teeth of his. Don't let these old texts stay quiet for too long. That's the rule, remember. Then I have no more objection. You have checked many reports just now, and judging by your expression, you must have discovered something, right? The old priest nodded. I can help. I found some records about heretic worship. Although it is not directly related to the incident I want to investigate, and the records themselves are scattered, I believe it's not so simple, Vanna said frankly. Those heretics had a common characteristic. They all happened in the first half of 1889. Then when the factory leak occurred in the 6th block, they all came to an abrupt halt. The old priest listened carefully to Vanna's description and then found the corresponding archival materials under the guidance of the other party. That's it. Vanna pointed to the documents that were dug up, the sacrificial rituals that should be invalid, the substantial mental damage, and the small-scale madness, are all real acts of heresy worship. The closing reports all look normal too. But I keep getting this sensation that the investigation wasn't done properly. For a case of this scale, capturing and trying those involved is already tantamount to an investigation. But you are right. When several similar incidents are compounded together in such a short period, then it's no longer a coincidence. The old priest frowned at the documents. All of the individuals who held a sacrifice were inexplicably bewitched, but the source of the temptation could not be identified. He muttered and suddenly raised his head like he had just caught onto something crucial. Your Excellency, you only examined the archives of 1889, didn't you? Yes, Vanna nodded and immediately caught on as well. You mean the incident you are concerned about did happen in 1889, but have you ever wondered if these strange cases may not necessarily start in 1889? The old priest quickly acted on his suspicion without waiting. The earlier records are here. You can read them all from the bottom to the top 3 rows. Vanna immediately went to the indicated shelf and examined the record files. Moments later, both of them found similar records of heresy worship in the documents they examined. 1888, 1887, and even backward until 1886. There's also a case report here, the sacrifice that took place in the port area. Here too, it's only 2 months apart from the last. Vanna quickly flipped through the pages in hand, her heart pounding from the excitement and thrill of discovering something crucial. However, it's precisely then that she noticed the old priest next to herself acting weird by staring up at a bookshelf. Did you find anything? Vanna frowned and asked with a hint of unease. Ads by PubFuture. There is no record of 1885, the old priest murmured. It should be here, in this row, after 1884, but after 1884, it directly goes to 1886, no vel b in .c ohm. Let's stop here, Duncan said as he glanced back in the direction of the freaky church. There should be no more to investigate here, so you can go home. They stayed in that chapel for far too long. If they want to make another breakthrough in the case, they must search for outside help since none of them could break the time-space distortion. Can I really go home? Shirley nervously eyed Duncan, her tone apprehensive and unsure. Of course, I have never restricted your freedom to leave. Duncan smiled and ruffled the other's hair. Although Shirley was about the same age as Nina, the girl's too petite and thin, so he couldn't help but treat her as a little kid. Today's investigation is over. You can go home. Shirley subconsciously turned her head to look in the direction of home, only to pause after taking 2 steps forward. Then, will we continue to investigate in the future? That's a given. This matter is far from over. Duncan raised an eyebrow. What? Are you reluctant to leave? No. Shirley quickly waved her hand in denial. The next time we investigate, I will find a way to contact you, or you can take the initiative and come to me. Duncan smiled again and rubbed Shirley's head some more, and not just to investigate, You can also call for help if you encounter other difficulties. Shirley blinked, thinking it was odd to nod reflexively at the offer. Then, as she was about to turn and leave, the girl suddenly threw out one last question. So, what is your next plan? Me. Duncan was stunned as he mused over the question. I'm going to buy a bike in the afternoon. Now it's Shirley's turn to be stunned. Huh. Buy a bike? Duncan earnestly repeated. I've promised Nina before. It's been a few days already, so I better hurry if I want to keep my promise. Something wrong. Shirley dropped her mouth for the longest time before blurting out a reply. D-Dog thought you would do something like invading the subspace or something. But before the conversation could go further, a burst of black flame suddenly materialized into the air and shouted next to the girl, I didn't say that. The next second, the black flame went poof again without giving them a chance to retort. Apparently, Dog was so afraid that he would be seen that he didn't even dare to pop his head out. Duncan. Unable to hold back the inner laugh anymore, the man decides to play along. Okay, this one here is going off to buy a bicycle for his niece within subspace. Let's leave it at that. Chapter 157 inches The Captain's Big Purchase. Duncan was telling the truth. After saying goodbye to Shirley, he actually went to the store near the crossroad to buy Nina a bike. At the same time, he also managed to tick off a task he's been putting off for a while due to various reasons, opening a bank account for himself. Inside the planned city bank, Duncan was waiting for the clerk at the front desk to prepare the last form for him. The waiting process was boring, of course, so he humored himself by paying attention to the surroundings instead. Perhaps it was because it was a work day, and not many upper and lower city citizens needed to handle business with the bank in general. The small lobby, which was not large in itself, seemed quite deserted, with 3 of the 5 service windows idling. The staff in black uniforms were busy chatting behind those unoccupied windows, and the bright electric light shown on the glass counter gave off a lazy and comfortable haloing effect. Following the light, Duncan's gaze moved upward and saw long casting pipes protruding out from the counters. They went straight to the ceiling like tiny pillars and extended somewhere to the halls behind the front. He didn't know what their uses were, but the low rhythmic click from beneath the floor indicated a mechanical device was likely running the whole operation underground. After confirming everything is correct, sign with your name and seal at the end. The handling fee is 6 soles and 5 pesos. The clerk confirmed the last item and handed the form back to Duncan while pointing to the last line. Duncan took the paper and quickly skimmed through the content. He's no expert in the banking world, so it didn't take long for the muddled lawyer talk to confuse him. After a short and painful read, he signed his name and handed the form back with the fee attached. The clerk took the form and glanced at it casually. Then, putting it into a large punching machine next to herself, she stuffed the document into a metal cylinder she had prepared before throwing it into the pipes. The sound of metal colliding, the closing of the pipe connections, the hiss of steam pressurization, and the sound of objects sliding rapidly through the tubes promptly reached Duncan's ears. One of the bent pipes even shook slightly at a bending corner when it slid off to some far-off place. Wait a bit, said the clerk behind the counter casually. If the steam pipe doesn't break down today and the machine on the other side happens to be in good condition, you'll get the receipt in half an hour. But if the blinker next to the pipe lights up, you'll have to come back tomorrow. The man inwardly thought the process was incredible. It may not be very efficient in his eye, but for this world, this could already be called advanced technology due to the limitations they had to work with in the deep sea age. Besides, what's so bad about waiting? He could eavesdrop on the conversation of the employees, who were chit-chatting about various topics not discussed on the streets. I heard the Truth Academy is in contact with the head office. Words going around that they're going to install a new machine to increase the processing efficiency of the head office several times over, a younger female clerk says. That's called a large sorting machine. The City State Bank in Moco has long been using it. There are a few smaller ones on the side of the tax office and the Institute of Mathematics, but I heard there's an even bigger one in the main Storm Cathedral. It's supposedly very good at sorting the documents inside the archive, the older clerk sitting across from Duncan mentions to her peers after the topic was brought up. If you ask me, the sorting machine in the head office should have been replaced ages ago. It's always breaking down and slow. Adds by PubFuture. Well, that's not up to us to decide. Another clerk from an idle service window joined in. That thing is expensive and bulky. Just counting the steam cores used to support the punching boxes is enough to fill the entire hall here. But didn't they say the Truth Academy is developing a newer generation of sorting machines? They say the size is half as big, and the performance is on par with the big ones. Oh, it's also rumored to be powered by electricity instead of steam. Electricity. Are they not using a steam core? What are they supposed to do if the machine is corrupted by evil spirits? That thing goes through so much information at once. Without the divine blessing of steam, it's going to attract dark things to its gears and bearings, right? How am I supposed to know? Maybe they intend to put a priest next to it and constantly purify the gears every day. If that's the case, it doesn't feel all that useful. Aside from making it smaller, it also occupies the work of a clergy. Ha! What do you know? How much space can a single priest take up compared to a single steam core? Do you have any idea how expensive the current housing marking is at the city center? It seems that no matter which world one is in, the gossiping nature of office workers never ceases to amaze. From the bank's aging machinery to the city's housing price, these bank clerks were all over the place to the point that Duncan had lost track of time due to how fascinated he was by their conversation. But the small talk didn't last long. With the banging sound coming from a nearby transmission pipe, everyone's topic of which one was more expensive, the housing price or the priest, was finally interrupted. The clerk opposite of Duncan popped open the pipe and took out a small cylinder. This small metal tube was obviously not the same model as the one sent away before. Instead, it looked thicker, and the seal had a complicated locking feature. It took a little fiddling with a special tool, but the clerk eventually popped the lid and took out the contents. It was a rectangular metal plate half the size of a palm, with letters and symbols stamped on it like a regular bank card. However, one side of the card had holes punched into it like those old punch cards used by ancient computers on Earth. This is your ID card, the clerk lady handed the metal plate over to Duncan. It can be used within any bank of Planned and the branches belonging to the Chamber of Commerce. However, if you use it outside of Planned, it will take 3 to 7 days to process the transaction. Thank you. Duncan took the metal plate and examined the creation that seemed to represent the current technological level of the city. There's no picture and such, only a few punch holes with his name mainly at the center. A simplistic form of identification, but effective nonetheless. At the very least, it represented a different type of advancement from that of Earth. Is there anything else we can do for you? An inquiry came from behind the counter. Ah, no, nothing else. Thank you. Duncan woke up from the little stupor and got up from his seat. But before leaving, he seemed to recall something and asked the clerk, by the way, can machines really be possessed by evil spirits? Ads by PubFuture. Of course it will. What's so strange about that? The clerk behind the counter immediately replied, as if the question was something she didn't need to think about at all. Isn't it common sense that everything in this world can be polluted except for subspace? Duncan was startled by the quick response, but at the same time, it triggered something inside his heart. A new idea. After a moment, he nodded lightly. Indeed, everything in this world can be polluted except for subspace. He then left the bank. According to the plan, he still has a big purchase to make today. In addition to buying Nina a bicycle, he also has a lot of things on his purchase list that could scare Nina into a mess. The income from the dagger sold to Mr. Morris, plus the bonus for reporting cultists, added up to a number that's capable of supporting a family of 3 in the lower city for 2 to 3 years. Since most of the money had not been touched yet, Duncan felt it was time to put them to work. So for the next half day, Duncan almost swept through every market and shop near the crossroad. At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in the shadow of an alley near the crossroad, Duncan dropped the luggage with a dunce sound before issuing a long, heaving breath. He's very satisfied with the mountain of things he bought. Flour, vegetables, seeds, spices, fresh meats, pickled ingredients, various dried mushrooms, drinks, and cheese. Edible, normal, cheese that's younger than him. In addition, there were even a whole bunch of pots and pans and a lot of things that Duncan thought might be useful. After transporting these things to the ship, the living environment of the vanished would surely take a drastic change for the better. At the very least, the kitchen could produce edible food. Duncan nodded gleefully and called out, "Aye." The sound of fluttering swiftly came from a nearby building, followed by Aya landing firmly on his shoulder. In the next second, This dove glanced at the things on the ground and exclaimed, "Are you messing with me?" November LBJNN. Before her words could stop ringing in the air, the bird had tilted her head and dropped dead towards the ground. Although Duncan hadn't said what he intended to do, it's clear as day to the witty creature. Duncan just smiled and grabbed the free-falling dove in midair. "It's okay. If once is not enough, you can go for several trips back and forth." Chapter 158 Inches Rose's Doll House. Truthfully speaking, there are not that many things piled up in the alley. After all, Duncan was only one person. Even if he bought a bicycle in advance to carry the goods over, there's a limit to the things he could bring at once. As for I's reaction, it's even easier to understand. She wanted to bargain for more fries. From a certain point of view, this bird was so easy to read. "Do you know what this is?" Duncan grabbed the dove and brought her to a basket of potatoes. "This is called potatoes." I blinked her green beanie eyes, staring down at the basket of things until she finally connected the dots. Then stretching her neck up and chirping vigorously, "It's so fragrant. It's so fragrant. If you know, then work hard. This basket is for you. The fries we can make from this batch are enough to fill you dozens of times." Duncan tossed the dove down so she could get a good whiff of paradise. "Send these things back to the ship and leave them on the deck. I will pick them up over on that side." I flapped her wings in glee and promptly wrapped herself in the green flame, turning into the undead form in the process. She needed no more persuasion now and was about to transport the goods when she suddenly stopped the act. "Do I need to memorize more web addresses?" Duncan was stumped by the odd phrase before realizing what she meant. "The thesaurus of this bird is too large and weird. How did the internet ever come up with these verses back on Earth? I'm probably guilty of it too, but trying to guess the meaning is such a brain tumor. Can't she learn some proper language for once?" But the bemoaning quickly died down as he gave a confirming nod that there's more to transport. "Send these away first. I still have more things to buy." This time I was really frightened and took off into the air, sweeping the grocery away along with her powers. Terrifying. How terrifying. Shrugging at the bird's antics, Duncan turned and rode the bike back to the main street. It was an ordinary bike with a black frame, shiny silver wheels, a bell, and a sturdy basket in the rear. Nothing special or good looking, but not ugly either. If Duncan had to point out its good points, it would be that it's built well. Duncan originally wanted to handpick a beautiful and feministic bike for Nina, but after taking a look around the shops in the lower city, he abandoned the idea because there weren't any. Ads by PubFuture. In the lower city, bicycles are bicycles, a tool for assisting production. There's not going to be any design in mind for different sexes or road use if they're meant for work. Aside from the adjustable seating and handles, Duncan couldn't find anything else he could change. In this deep-sea age, where life was hard, there are bound to be limiting factors in the pleasure of its people. It's also a constant reminder for Duncan that he's not on Earth anymore and that this world has its only way of doing things. He pedaled harder after accepting this truth. There are still many things to buy in the commercial district, and there's not enough time if he dallied around. Leaving the crossroad district to head up, he cycled past several streets until he was in the upper city where it's considered to have a higher standard of living. Unlike Duncan's initial imagination, there were no physical barriers between the lower and upper segments despite the clear administrative division. Well, there were police posts at the intersections, but that's obviously not meant to prohibit the citizens from passing through. Of course, this was only the setup during the day. According to Duncan's inquiry, there will be a strict ban on passage after nightfall. Even with a permit, there are extra administrative procedures if one wishes to pass. Duncan went straight in for his first visit to the high society of Pland, and he had to admit it was very different from the poorer sectors of the lower city. It's reflected in almost every aspect of life here: cleaner and wider streets, taller buildings, more advanced urban facilities, and a clear outnumbering of street lamps and night shelters. Eventually, Duncan stopped the bike in front of a small kiosk near the first intersection he came across. This was a nighttime shelter to help citizens unable to return home in time for various reasons after nightfall. The description sign at the entrance read as follows: "Night shelter with gas lamps, sacred oil, and the storm codex inside. Please lock the door after entering, wait for rescue, and the night guardian has a safety key." In the lower city, Duncan had seen similar facilities near his home, but there were only one or two in almost an entire block that looked mottled and old to the point it was questionable if it was still usable. Duncan withdrew his gaze, got on his bike, and continued slowly up the street that's filled with shops and display windows. It gives him a good idea of their goods without the need to enter. He still had a lot to buy, and buying supplies for the vanished was a matter that had been delayed for far too long, and Duncan suddenly hit the brakes after finding the shop he wanted. N-O-V-E, in .c ohm. Ads by PubFuture. Some things cannot be bought in the lower city, only the decent people of the upper city have the energy and wealth to spend on luxury goods. Locking his bicycle, he stepped forward and went inside following a crisp chime from the bell as his entrance. Welcome to Rose's doll house. Oh, a gentleman. Are you here to choose a present for your lover or junior? The chubby older woman who was actively reading the newspaper welcomes him with a kind and friendly smile. Just taking a look for now, Duncan replied and examined the goods on display inside. Everywhere the eye could see, there were dolls littering the shelves, exquisite ones, elegant ones, mysterious ones, cute ones, and playful naughty ones. When he was outside on the street, he apparently only got a glimpse of what the shop had to offer. There were more than just dolls here. Dresses, shoes, skirts, trinkets, things that Duncan couldn't even fathom. This extensive array of goods bedazzled the poor man. Naturally, since Duncan was the only visitor right now, the owner would of course be drawn toward the strange customer that's getting overwhelmed. It's not uncommon for men to visit doll shops. Many decent men in the upper city had this habit of gifting such items to their partners or juniors. In fact, it's not unheard of for men to collect dolls as a hobby. However, what really piqued this shop owner's curiosity was the plain-looking outfit the customer wore. It didn't look like someone that's financially capable of making a purchase, and dolls weren't cheap in these parts. However, the woman only glanced at the clothes for a second before quickly withdrawing her gaze. Judging what customers are by their attire wasn't a polite thing to do. As a mature and experienced businesswoman, she had better judgment than to commit such a blunder. Besides, everyone has the right to appreciate the goods in her store. Duncan finally retracted his gaze from the shelves after getting blinded by the amount of inventory. He knew a doll, but he never knew there could be so many accessories for one. It exceeded his understanding. Turning to face the chubby woman and giving a humble bow with his head. He knew better than to tackle this problem on his own. When you don't know what to do for a hair transplant, ask a professional. But before he could speak, Duncan was suddenly startled by what he saw. The reason? It's because the woman had long, pointed ears coming out from the side. Not missing a beat at the astonished look from the customer, the elvish woman merrily advanced the conversation. I understand, elves are indeed a rare sight in Pland. Duncan. He admits that elves in the city-state of Pland may indeed be rare, and yes, it's his first time meeting one, but the bigger reason for his shock was that he didn't expect a blessed elf to be an old lady. What happened to the super hot model stereotype of elves? Chapter 159 Inches Who's Forcing Who? Humans are not the only intelligent races that survived from the old world when the deep sea age arrived. Take elves, beastkin, and orcs to name just a few. This was the knowledge written in Nina's textbook that Duncan had read a while back. Of all the races though, he's most interested in the elves since they are described as a species with a high visual standard and an exceptionally long lifespan. However, he apparently didn't factor in the part of them aging just like humans do on the surface. Talk about a soul-crushing reality check. The owner of Rose's doll house was an elf, a chubby, smiling elvish oldish lady. Apart from her signature pointed ears and turquoise pupils that faintly indicated at her youthful beauty in the prior years, she's no different from the friendly old lady next door. Duncan quickly realized he's been staring and swiftly withdrew his overly curious gaze. Scratching his cheek with some embarrassment, this is the first time I have seen an elf. He was not worried about what his rudeness would bring, because elves were rarely seen in the city-state of Pland. The major races had their own city-states, and due to the inaccessibility of the deep sea age, most commoners rarely left their homeland during their lives, with only the brave daring to do so for trade and such. In the rare cases that they do, they are usually only passers-by and almost never do they stay in one state for long. This is normal, the old elvish woman giggled in delight. I am afraid that there are no more than 100 elves in this city, including the dozen or so who have been squatting in the Mathematical Institute for 200 years without going out. Is there anything I can help with? Listening to the old woman's reminder, Duncan reflected on his original purpose and glanced around the shop. I want to buy a few things for a doll, and if I can, I want to ask some questions as well, but as soon as I came in, I was overwhelmed. Oh, it looks like you're a novice, the old woman nodded. Is it a female doll? Is it your own collection, or? Female, it's a part of my own collection, Duncan replied casually. But as soon as he finished speaking, the man regretted it because the words left a weird taste on his tongue. This hobby isn't strange, is it? Ads by PubFuture. Of course not. Collecting and caring for dolls is a tasteful interest. The old woman didn't tease him and unleashed her century-old knowledge in the field. Do you want to buy some clothes or accessories for your doll? Duncan thought for a moment before nodding. Let's get a wig first. Over here, the old shopkeeper led Duncan to the corner of the shop. How big is your doll? 4 points. Or 3 points. Duncan. As big as a real person. The old woman's pacing faltered for a second before peeking around. This is quite rare, a life-sized doll. Is it worth a lot? Actually, I'm not sure how much she's worth. Duncan tried to keep his face straight while enduring the awkward feeling in his heart. It was sent to me by someone else. Then it seems that you have a friend who is quite wealthy. The old woman broadened her grin as she circled around to open a wooden box on the counter. Large-sized dolls are rare, and there are even fewer accessories out there for them. Thankfully I kept a few in storage just for these occasions. Duncan coughed dryly, muttering as he leaned over to see. I don't know if they're rich or not, but they're a captain. It's complicated. The items shown were beautifully crafted and well maintained, evident that the owner has gone through great effort to keep them pristine. However, as soon as Duncan imagined Alice wearing some of these fine trinkets and realistic wigs, he would inadvertently imagine her also going bald in the future. No matter how calm and experienced he was, Duncan still gave a shudder at the picture. Oh screw it. If I'm going to buy something then let's make it nice. Watching a bald headless doll walking around me is too creepy no matter the circumstances. Immediately, Duncan's gaze fell upon a gorgeous blonde wig with matching silvery hair accessories in the box. According to his biased perception, a Western noble should always be a blonde, and not just any blonde, but a blonde female with fine accessories, just like in the old Western chick flicks from Europe. By the way, can I inquire about how I should go about maintaining a doll? He casually asks while picking out the items. Ads by PubFuture. Of course, the old elvish woman smiled kindly. Dolls need to be cared for with a fine touch. Then, what should I do if the joints of the dolls are often coming loose? Duncan gestured at his own neck while organizing the language. The main part is around the neck where the ball bearing is. It always comes loose and the head pops off. The wear and deformation of the connecting ball bearing is either because of neglect or mishandling by the user in the later stages. If not, the only answer would be that the original design or material is not up to standard, the old elvish woman explains. If it has reached the stage where the head is constantly falling off, then ordinary repairs are pointless and ineffective. I recommend replacing the joints entirely to solve the issue. Speaking of this, she thought for a while and added, but replacing the joint bearing around the neck area wouldn't be easy if it's as big as you mentioned. If you can't figure out how to do, our business here can also offer that service. The parts used will be at cost with a little extra as the service fee. Duncan contemplated the feasibility of the suggestion and found it not possible. It's one thing for an ordinary doll, but Alice was anomaly 099. Could her parts be easily replaced? What's more, there's a strong chance that Alice would openly make a run for it if told she's going under the knife. So, Duncan quickly dropped the topic and inquired about making a hair transplant instead. The old shop owner patiently explained many things to him, and after the brief lesson, she added, after listening to what you said, I want to make a different suggestion. Dolls are a difficult thing to repair. If you wish to transplant a new wig onto the head, it will be hard to achieve a perfect job unless the doll maker themselves personally do it. In addition, you also mentioned the head joint to the body is constantly dislocating. That implies the tear is already at the last stage of acceptable furnishing. I suggest you reorder a new head sculpture instead. Duncan. The old lady grew quite enthusiastic after seeing the reaction. Judging by your face, you are unsure if you are willing. Don't worry, I can reassure you our business here can perform such an operation. We have 100 years worth of experience and reputation to our name. No complaint has ever come from our regulars so far. Despite the reassurance, Duncan didn't feel the same way. In his view, the elvish lady probably didn't have much regulars to begin with, and if they were, those people had likely gone to the grave by now. Showing an awkward smile. But, if I change the head, it wouldn't be the same doll anymore, right? Unexpectedly, the remark only made the old lady's enthusiasm grow stronger. Lighting up in her eyes, ah, that is quite the way of viewing things. Most people would only treat their dolls as an object. Even if they like it, they won't think about it in such a manner. Duncan was a little embarrassed all of a sudden. Ahem, I'm a little embarrassed if you say it like that. November LBJNN. I'm merely stating the truth, the old lady sighed. Dolls need to be taken care of, and the moment they are given a human form, they should no longer be treated as inanimate objects. There is a saying among puppeteers, puppets that are carefully treated have their own souls, and you should even think of them having their own joys, sorrows, and anger. Duncan's mind immediately brought up the image of Alice's harmless, hee-hee, act. Nodding repeatedly in agreement. You're right, you're right. Chapter 160 inches the most outstanding puppeteer. On the vanished, the bright sun shone hard on the scrubbed upper deck as a swirling green flame gradually dissipated over the surface. Alice watched the clearing with stunned silence as many items appeared before her. This, what is this? The puppet lady exclaims. You're stuttering as if your head is going to pop off again. Haven't seen pots and pans before. Duncan teases from the side. Alice stiffly swung her head around and faced the ghost captain who had just come out from the inside. No, I haven't seen these things before. Duncan, I haven't seen them before, Alice continued reasonably. I've been in the box for so many years, where can I see these things? Duncan was shocked for a moment and then facepalmed himself. I forgot, okay, in some ways, you're better than Shirley. Alice was about to step forward at this time to study the large number of things when she picked up on the name, Shirley. Who? Someone I met in the city-state. Maybe one day you will have the opportunity to meet her, Duncan thought for a moment. I think we're quite relatable. Oh, Alice hummed merrily and quickly forgot the matter after circling around the pile of items. Ads by PubFuture. This is flour, is this meat? It's really different from the jerky on the ship, is this vegetable? It feels so fragile, and it's cold, what is this round? Ah, it broke. Don't crush the eggs. Duncan realized how chaotic this puppet was once she started crushing an egg. Without delay, he stepped forward and swatted the lady's hand back. These things are supposed to improve the living condition on the ship. Hee. Alice let out her signature giggle and withdrew her hand. I'm just a little curious. It's my first time seeing so many things. Duncan glanced helplessly at the puppet and understood what she meant. Alice's brain, if she really has this organ in her brain to begin with, has a lot of innate knowledge. She knows how to communicate with people, knows things that exist in the world, and even accumulates the first impression of the world by listening to the voices outside the box. However, she had always been in a sealed state. Strictly speaking, her real contact with this world only started not long ago, and as soon as she came out, she contacted the Vanished, a ship that's absolutely not suitable for a novice who's just starting out. She lacks knowledge of the real world to the point a single piece of leafy green is an incredible object to Alice. The human city-state is such an incredible place. Miss Doll issued a sincere sigh after taking in the colorful packages on the deck. It must be much bigger than the ship, right? Large, but much smaller than the boundless sea, Duncan replied casually, remembering what he promised Alice after seeing the anticipation in those eyes. He said he was going to take Alice to the city-state. I will solve the trouble on the city-state side as soon as possible and figure out your secret, he said seriously to the puppet in front of him. Until then, be patient. Okay. Alice showed a bright, carefree smile. Being carefree does have its good points. Duncan had been accumulating a bunch of negative vibes from the things he discovered and planned. With the doll's interference, he's finally able to relax for a moment. Come help me move them into the kitchen. This pile over here can go into my personal quarters. Ads by PubFuture. Ooh, okay. Alice immediately agreed with a salute of a proper sailor for some reason. Will you use them for tonight's dinner? Duncan turned his head and narrowed those eyes suspiciously. It can be, but are you able to use them? Nope. Alice said of course, but I can ask Mr. Goathead for help. He said his skills are better than 90% of the cooks in this world. And you dare to believe him? Duncan popped his eyes in disbelief, like he was hearing the most insane comment. You better not touch the ingredients until I go over there. I'll make dinner instead. If you want to seriously learn how to make something edible, don't learn it from Goathead. He doesn't even have a digestive tract. Oh, Alice nodded meekly, then glanced at I, who was pacing on the deck next to them. Will I still go over to that side later? Of course, there's more stuff for her to transport later. Are you still shopping? Alice asked curiously. What else do you want to buy? November LBJNN. Duncan raised a raised eyebrow at the puppet's face before forming a smile. Based on the glint in those eyes, he could easily guess what Alice wanted. I'm buying you something, Alice. The city state of planned, inside Rose's doll house. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan thought that the kind elven old lady might have misunderstood him, but no matter, he didn't intend to explain in this case. The main thing was that there's no way to explain it. How was he supposed to tell her? Say that he really has a doll with a soul. That it could jump with joy and cry with sorrow. Say it's balding, and now he needs to change out the old wig. In the best case scenario, the shop owner would only run to the church and report him. Worst case scenario, she might lash out with some elven magic or something and exorcise him like in the fantasy books. So what exactly was the old elven lady thinking right now? To her, she's found a confidant who loves dolls and is willing to devote a lot of energy to this area. In Plan's high society, many people buy dolls, and many are really keen on collecting, but few showed such heartfelt affection and concern for dolls as this gentleman today, which gives her a feeling that it was as if the other party was not talking about objects when they mention their dolls, but a living person and a friend. Even many puppeteers don't necessarily have this attitude. The two talked happily from that point forward, and Duncan finally got a lot of knowledge about dolls from a professional, although he doesn't know how much of this knowledge could be used on Alice. The owner obviously hasn't met such a close customer for a long time. After some conversation, the old lady couldn't help but laugh and sigh. I have lived in this city for up to 400 years and survived 17 city admins, but none of them really understood dolls. Alas, it may not sound right for me to say this, but it seems to me that humans are a much more indifferent species than us elves. I don't know much about elven society, Duncan said, trying to guide the other party to say more about her kind, but I heard, the Wind Harbor is gathered with the world's most outstanding craftsmen. The elves' unique craftsmanship is world famous. Elves are indeed good at elaborate crafts, and we are a race that is naturally sensitive to mathematics and art, so most of the famous puppeteers in this world are also elves, the old woman said frankly with genuine pride in her tone. However, it quickly changed in the next second, but when it comes to the profession of a puppeteer, many peers from the other races have a prejudice against us elves. It is often said that elves are not so talented in craftsmanship, and the reason why we can produce so many puppet masters is entirely because of our lifespan being long enough to grind it out. Duncan suddenly didn't know how to pick up from there. Well, I guess everywhere is the same. They're your colleagues and peers but also your competition. So, what's your evaluation of their opinion? The old woman bellowed out a laugh. Me. I think they're right. Duncan. I think they're right, the old woman repeated with a pleasant smile on her face. Every year on the Day of the Dead, I have to go to the graves of a few of my old colleagues to say hello. I would always tell them they were right, and if they have the ability, come up and beat me. Duncan. Are all the elves of this world like this? Why do I feel like there is something wrong with this trajectory of the conversation? I'm just joking. Probably noticing the expression on Duncan's face, the old woman shook her head and moved on. There's no way we would have that many people to hate. The idea only came to be because everyone in our field likes to talk humor when we meet during our brief encounters. If you ask me, the most outstanding puppeteer is not among us elves but a human. A human? Duncan asked casually. Yes, not many ordinary humans know this name now, the old woman said slowly with a slight emotion. Her name is Lucretia Abnomar, the daughter of the famous Captain Duncan, the most outstanding puppeteer I have ever met. Duncan.